a recession at best, maybe something worse, something more like a global liquidity crisis. The hard place is inflation, worse than what we're seeing already. Those are the Fed's two choices. This notion of a so-called soft landing where we can raise interest rates a little at a time and get inflation under control, but keep the economy going. That's not going to happen. We're either going to have a recession, or the Fed will at some point balk, not like what's going on in the markets, throw in the towel, in which case inflation will take off.
According to recent reports, the United States economy shrank by 0.9% in the second quarter of 2022. In itself, this would have been extremely concerning. This is the economy of the United States of America, the world's leading economy. But what makes the report more worrisome and chilling is that it was preceded by a 1.6% decrease in the first quarter of the year. This means that the U.S. has had 2 consecutive quarters of negative growth, the most obvious sign of a recession by many standards. Though there has been no official confirmation from the White House, the unofficial consensus is that the United States economy is in a recession. According to the Royal Bank of Canada, the Canadian economy is next in line to suffer this cruel fate. U.S. and Canadian residents that have been battling insane price hikes and massive supply chain disruptions now have to brace for a head-on collision with a severe period of economic downturn that could last for several months. According to experts, in the coming months, Canadians and Americans will feel the weight of the downturn as the economy slows down, stock prices plummet sharply, businesses lose revenue and profit, unemployment increases drastically, interest rates remain shockingly high. By next year, the RBC expects Canada's unemployment levels to have increased by 1.5% to 6.6%, just 2 percentage points below the unemployment level during the global financial crisis of 2008. Canada's largest bank also expects that slowing growth in other countries, especially the United States, will spill over into Canada. In a recent interview, American economist and investment banker Jim Rickards explains the current dilemma that the U.S. Federal Reserve and the Bank of Canada face as they both struggle to bring down inflation, only to plunge both economies into nasty recessions. Thanks for joining us on today's video on Savvy Economists. In this video, we bring you Jim Rickards' interview about the state of the United States and Canadian economies. Please watch, like and share this video, drop your comments and observations below, and subscribe for more videos like this. Enjoy the video.
Now, it's clear that Powell said, we're going to get rid of inflation. We're going to subdue inflation. We're not going to stop until that happens. Okay, that's a pretty clear direction. By the way, if you look at what Powell actually said, you got to be a little bit of a geek and watch the whole press conference and take notes and get a transcript and all that. Not the FOMC statement. That's a little bit. I know the guy who writes those. It's a little cut and dried. But what Powell actually said, it was interesting. At one point, he said the U.S. economy is in great shape. Or, worse to that effect. But that was pretty much exactly what he said, which is nonsense. It's not in great shape. People ask me, are we going to have a recession? And my answer is we might be in a recession right now and not even know it. U.S. growth, I'm talking about the U.S., but Canada, EU, Japan, and others are not much better. We could be facing a global recession, including China, but just focusing on the U.S. Because that's the Fed's sort of territory. First quarter growth was negative 1.5%. So we have that. That zero could tip into negative, in which case you could have 2 consecutive quarters of declining GDP, and that is the definition of a recession. So my point being, we might be in a recession already. We'll find out later this year, but the data right now certainly points in that direction. So Powell saying the economy is great is nonsense. What he said, if you look at all of his other forecasts and higher interest rates, how do you reconcile those things? He said all 3 of those things, but what state of the world could make those things come true? There's only one, which is a recession. A recession would do it. A recession will raise unemployment, higher interest rates will cause the recession, and the recession will cause inflation to go down. So in effect, Powell is saying we're going to have a recession. And this is why Wall Street reacted the way it did.
As Rickards points out, there is no way out for the U.S., Canada, Japan, China, and other economies that have had to hike interest rates to bring down inflation. If the hikes continue, recession follows immediately. The opposite will be to leave inflation unchallenged, which would also have dire consequences for any economy. With 2 consecutive quarters of negative economic growth, the United States has already crossed that crucial threshold. The Federal Reserve has also announced another 75 basis points interest rate hike, which should further help to slow down the economy. For Canada, which has recently had its first full percentage point interest rate hike since 1998, it is only a matter of time before everything collapses. Let's get back to Jim Rickards' interview as he speaks about the causes of inflation and how investors can survive during periods of economic downturn.
But inflation, broadly speaking, has two causes. One is called, not to get too technical, but it's called cost push. This comes from the supply side. So there's a shortage of oil, and we've got a financial and economic war going on between Russia and the United States. The U.S. really started, but U.S., EU, Canada, Australia, Japan versus Russia. That's obviously disrupting supply chain, cutting down energy supply, causing the price of oil to go up, etc. So that's coming from the supply side. And you're exactly right. The Fed can't drill for oil. The Fed can't plant wheat. The Fed can't make semiconductors. So they can't do anything about this. And the supply chains are breaking down. They were breaking down before the war in Ukraine, but Ukraine has made it worse. The other source of inflation is called demand pull. And this is when individuals, you, me, and all of our viewers, and everyday Canadians and Americans, worry about inflation. We say, well, I'm just thinking about buying a refrigerator. Better buy it now before the price goes up, or the car, house, or whatever it might be. They're different, but they affect each other. When the cost push inflation from the supply side has enough effect, there's a tipping point or critical threshold in psychology. We say, maybe it is out of control. I better go buy some stuff. Then the velocity of money goes up, and then you get inflation. So the Fed can't do anything about cost push. They can't do anything about the price of oil, and you're right about that. But they're looking at the demand side, saying, hey, if this supply thing goes on long enough, eventually the psychology will change, and we'll get demand pull and behavioral, and that is really hard to change. So what they're trying to do, they know they can't change the supply side, but they're trying to squash the demand side before it gets out of control. Now, the question, of course, is can they do it? The answer is they can do it, but at what cost? So a general rule of thumb, this is really simple. You have to forget about nominal interest rates. Nominal interest rates are the rates you see on your screen, you hear about in the headlines and all that. Real interest rates are nominal interest rates minus inflation. Take the inflation out and see what's left. Well, right now, real interest rates are about 2%, actually 1.75% under the Fed policy rate. Inflation's 8.6%. So, just round numbers, 1.5 minus 8.5, that makes the inflation rate -7. It's nowhere near. It's got to be +2. Real rates have to be +2 to squash inflation. Right now, they're -7. So that implies that the Fed has to raise interest rates to 10.5% to get to +2 real interest rates. That's never going to happen. They're never going to get there. They will destroy the economy long before they get there. So the Fed has no hope of squashing inflation from the demand side, as you described, by raising rates, unless inflation comes down for other reasons. So what they're going to do, they're going to keep raising rates, 2, 2.5, 3, 3.5, 4, hope that inflation comes down from 8 to maybe 3, although I think that's a stretch. You could get into positive real rate territory, but they're really far away from it. So I think, by the way, I described what they're trying to do. I should make it clear they're going to fail. The only way inflation comes down, the way we're talking about, is if they trash the economy. So if I said we're definitely going to have inflation, you would know what to do. You'd buy gold, hard assets, land, silver, treasury notes, government bonds, etc. If I said we're definitely going to have deflation, you would also know what to do. You would reduce leverage. You would have more cash, and there are other assets you could go into. The problem is we could have both. There's no question we have inflation right now. It's front and center. But if the Fed squashes it and causes a recession or worse, you can flip to deflation very quickly. So this is going to sound like an obvious statement. What you want is diversification. Sounds obvious, but most people don't know what diversification is. I see people, I've got 50 stocks in 10 different sectors. I'm highly diversified. I'm like, no, you're not. You have one asset class called stocks. Real diversification, have a slice of stocks, gold, real estate, cash.
According to the veteran finance commentator, it is not a matter of if but when. Though these economic hardships hit both economies hard and fast, recovery will be slow, excruciating, and extremely frustrating for citizens who already have so much to worry about. What are your thoughts on Jim Rickards' statement that this is going to be a global recession, and what is the current state of your country's economy? Please drop your comments and observations below, and don't forget to like this video. You can also subscribe and turn on post notifications so you never miss any of our regular uploads. Thanks for watching.